on.
that.
It's on. It's on.
Okay.
So let me pan. Lick your own lips.
Okay. Who else is fun? Is anybody else fun?
I was going to do
Okay,
it.
cool.
Did you get Kath? Okay, now what's that?
It's on. Can't take your mama
I'll
anywhere.
do it real quick.
Okay.
A new dawn is broken, has a nod. These were the first words that Tony Blair said as Prime Minister after he was elected May 2nd, 1997. It seemed right from the beginning that he had a very high level of emotional intelligence, as he was able to recognize the gravity of the moment as the Labour Party had taken power for the first time since 1979. The first component of emotional intelligence is self-awareness, and this is considered the most important, but is often the hardest to identify, as it's a big part of self-awareness is realizing, is recognizing your own emotions, but also a big part of it is understanding what you do well and what you don't do well. Tony Blair was very good at understanding what he did well and what he did not do well. One of the documentaries that I watched in learning more about Tony Blair, there was a part at the beginning where different politicians from the United States and also from Great Britain played the game of one-word association, when they explained how they would consider Tony Blair. The most popular word that came up was actor, and Blair was very good at winning the hearts and the minds of people. He understood what he did well, and he understood what he didn't do well. During the 1990s, there was a major leadership dispute within the party as they realized they were probably going to take power in 1997. And a famous quote is one Labour Party member was complaining, well, Blair doesn't really understand the intricacies of policy. And they said, well, and this other member of Parliament said, well, sometimes politics is about the ugly business of getting other people to like you. And that's what Blair was good at. In fact, when they won Parliament in 1997, Blair ran on a very deliberately vague platform. He sold basically very general ideas to the public, ideas of improving healthcare and education. But he really didn't sell to the public any of the intricacies of implementing these policies. He just talked about the general ideas. He was so good at what he did well, but he also knew what he did not do well. Self-management is the second major component of emotional intelligence, and this brings us to a more unpleasant time in his era of being Prime Minister, and this was election 2005. In 1997 and 2001, the Labour Party won massive majorities in Parliament, but in 2005 was a much closer election. And he had to go around the country to different town hall meetings, and he had to go and basically campaign for different members of Parliament, and he had to sell these extremely unpopular ideas. He had to talk about raising college tuition because he was worried about the country's finances. He had to discuss his views on the Iraq War and also the war in Afghanistan. They were very unpopular. He had to take a lot of criticism. He was called a liar. He was called a turncoat, and he had to manage his own emotions very well, and he did that. And the result of that was that they won the 2012 Olympic bid in London. It's widely considered that Blair was the only personality in British politics at the time who had the clout on the world stage to bring the 2012 Olympics to London. And he did that from basically managing his emotions during the 2005 election. In the United States, we have 9/11. That was a very emotional moment for all of us. In Great Britain and in London, they had the attacks of 7/7, where Al-Qaeda attacked the subway system in London. This was also an extremely uncomfortable time for Blair. He had to stand up for his positions on the Iraq War and the war in Afghanistan. He had to take a lot of criticism within his own party, and he had to control his emotions, and he did it masterfully. The first two components of emotional intelligence are called there are personal competencies, and the second two components are what's called social competency. He was masterful at the first two, but he was also probably even more well known for the two social competencies. Social awareness is the ability to interpret the emotions of people around you in a social setting, and he was absolutely masterful at that. The greatest example is the death of Princess Diana. He was able to interpret the emotions of the country, and he was able to identify them better than any other politician at the time. He referred to Princess Diana as the people's princess, and this was, by a lot of people, this was considered an overreach. But at the end of the day, he was the only one who was able to accurately identify the emotions of the country. There was actually an aide of Tony Blair at the time who was talking to some other people in the room who were watching this newscast, and he said, Tony Blair has gone too far this time, and he looked around, and a lot of other people were crying, and he said, well, this is the reason why Tony Blair is prime minister, but I never will be. Blair was just absolutely masterful at understanding the people around him. He also talked the royal family into flying the flag at half-mast over Buckingham Palace. Again, this was something that he really had to push for, as the royal family was not eager to do this at the time, but he was good at understanding the emotions of the people around him. At the time, the monarch, the royal family in Great Britain, was at their lowest level of popularity in history, and he talked the Queen into going on live television and expressing her sorrow for the death of Diana. Again, another example of really understanding the emotions of the people around him. The final component of emotional intelligence, and really the one where Blair seemed to thrive more than anything else over his career, he had hundreds of positive relationships with people over time, and he was just masterful at managing relationships for people from all walks of life. He was masterful at managing his relationship with Bill Clinton. In 1997, he was elected Prime Minister. Clinton had already been president for 5 years. They shared a lot of ideological similarities, but they were very, very different personally. And he quickly expressed empathy during the Lewinsky scandal, and also during Clinton's perjury charges. And it really won a great deal of respect from Clinton. And during the Milosevic conflict in Eastern Europe, he was able to convince Clinton to threaten ground troops, which ended the war a lot quicker. This was very unpopular in the United States, but in Great Britain they were willing to do that because they were so concerned about the close geography of Eastern Europe. They wanted it to end as soon as possible. He also showed that he could have a relationship with someone who was from a different side of the aisle politically. He was able to find commonalities with President Bush. He identified that even though Blair's much more private about his religious beliefs, he found the commonality of faith with President Bush, and just had an extraordinarily positive relationship with him, showing that he could get along with someone from the ideological opposite side of the spectrum. By far the most important relationship of his career was with Gordon Brown. They both came into Parliament in 1983. Brown was always more of the policy expert, where Blair was more of the relationship expert. He was good at dealing with people, where Brown was good at dealing with the intricacies of policy. The only time he ever used the word emotional intelligence in a quote was expressing that Brown had none. So it was basically a clear example that he was the driving force in the Labour Party victory of 1997. The period of 97 through 2007 is often considered the Blair decade. He was a very powerful figure both in Great Britain and also on the world stage. His final speech in Parliament was basically communicating with future Prime Minister David Cameron, and he used the famous quote, it would not be proper for me to wish you the best politically, but I do wish you the best personally. And it showed a great deal of emotional intelligence as he realized that Cameron would probably be the next Prime Minister of Great Britain from the opposite party. It showed that he had a good deal of social awareness, but it also showed that he had a great deal of class.
9 minutes, 54
Did you
seconds.
shut off?